"The house is already sold," Grant said, sliding divorce papers beneath my Army commendation. "You have nowhere left to go." His mother raised a champagne glass beside him, while my suitcases stood near the front door. I still wore my uniform, and my grandfather's brass compass pressed against my palm, hard enough to leave a circle in my skin. That morning, I had learned that my grandmother left me $7 million in Juniper Crown Estate near Aspen. I came home expecting grief relief and perhaps one honest embrace. Instead, Grant said he had sold the estate before the inheritance transferred. Lorraine smiled and added, "Your grandmother's money will be divided too." I looked at the contract on the table. The cover page named Juniper Crown, but the parcel number in the final attachment belonged somewhere else. My breathing steadied as Grant asked, "Why are you smiling?" "Because you sold the wrong house." He laughed because he believed shock had confused me. Lorraine told him not to argue with a woman who had just lost everything. Neither of them understood that the final legal description identified the house where we were sitting. I still have the brass compass, although it no longer guides me through mountain roads. It reminds me that direction depends on fixed points, not on whoever speaks with the most confidence. So stay with me while I return to 5 months earlier, when my grandmother was alive and Grant first began measuring her home as though grief were already a business opportunity. My name is Sloane Harper. I had served 25 years in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. My work involved bridges, utilities, temporary housing, and the unglamorous systems that kept military families safe after storms, fires, or structural failure. During one disaster response, I slept on the floor of a coordination center for 4 nights while our teams restored clean water to family housing. Grant later joked that I love maps more than marriage. He never understood that a map was a promise that someone had studied the ground before asking others to walk across it. My grandmother Ruth understood. She had spent 32 years as the wife of an Army officer, moving between installations and rebuilding a home wherever orders sent them. When my grandfather died, she kept his brass compass and used it during long walks around Juniper Crown. The estate sat outside Aspen beneath a ridge of fir and aspen trees. It was valuable, but Ruth never treated it as a trophy. She hosted military widows there, gave wounded families quiet weeks away from hospitals, and funded small scholarships through rental income from a separate cabin. Ruth believed land should remember who had been welcomed onto it. She kept a white mug in her kitchen that read, "Build what lasts." Whenever Grant spoke about luxury development, she turned the words toward him and asked what exactly he had built that helped anyone stay standing. Grant owned a real estate development company in Colorado Springs. Publicly, he appeared successful. He drove a new vehicle, wore tailored suits, and spoke about resort projects as though each one had already changed the skyline. Privately, his newest project was failing. Contractors had filed payment demands, a lender had tightened the company credit line, and one investor had threatened legal action. Grant called it a temporary cash problem. I believed him longer than I should have because trust often makes ordinary explanations feel safer than accurate ones. He first asked about Juniper Crown during dinner at Ruth's house. He wanted to know whether she held the estate personally or through a trust. Ruth set down her fork and asked why that mattered. "I am thinking about long-term tax planning," he said. "You are thinking about my death before dessert," she answered. Lorraine defended him. She said Grant had sacrificed years while I served and deserved a chance to build something lasting. Ruth looked at me instead. Did he sacrifice or did he remain married while expecting repayment? The question made Grant angry for the rest of the evening. On our drive home, he accused Ruth of poisoning me against him. I told him she had only answered a question he chose to ask. Over the following weeks, Grant became unusually interested in trust law inheritance rules and whether property received during marriage remained separate. He asked where Ruth stored deeds and whether I could sell immediately after inheriting. I gave him the same answer each time. Nothing belonged to me while Ruth was alive and her plans were private. Grant said secrecy proved she did not trust our marriage. Lorraine said Ruth was using money to control me. Then Ruth heard them talking in her library. Grant said a luxury resort company would pay enough for Juniper Crown to rescue his business and finance a second project. Lorraine told him to secure an agreement before the old woman changed her mind again. Ruth did not confront them that evening. Instead, she asked me to walk the northern boundary with her. Snow remained beneath the trees, and she moved slowly, using my arm when the ground became uneven. At the overlook, Ruth handed me the iron key to Juniper Crown. People who rush toward property usually forget to ask what the land remembers, she said. She also showed me a topographic map marked with cabins, water lines, conservation boundaries, and a small parcel reserved for military family programs. 3 weeks later, Ruth completed an irrevocable legacy trust. Juniper Crown entered the trust before her health declined. I became successor trustee, not direct owner, and the estate's purpose could not be changed without independent review. The $7 million came through separate accounts designated for me. Ruth's attorney explained that Grant would hold no authority over the trust even as my husband. Ruth had not excluded him from spite. She had watched him calculate value without once asking whom the property was. Grant knew none of the final details. He only knew Ruth had signed documents and that I remained away on assignment. While I was working outside the state, he opened our home safe and found an old limited power of attorney. I had signed it years earlier before a long deployment. It allowed Grant to refinance lease or sell our Colorado Springs home during a genuine financial emergency. The document included the street address, parcel number, and full legal description of that property. It did not mention Aspen. It did not cover inheritances. It did not authorize Grant to act for a trust. Grant replaced the cover page with one naming Juniper Crown Estate. He showed Lorraine the altered document and told her it gave him authority over every property connected to me. She urged him to close the sale before I returned. His resort buyer offered a large deposit based on the Aspen address displayed on the first page. Grant signed quickly, accepted the funds, and used part of the money to pay company debts. Another portion moved into an account Lorraine controlled. He prepared the divorce petition before Ruth died. When Ruth passed, I was overseeing an emergency infrastructure project. Grant called me with a tender voice and said we would face the loss together. While I arranged the funeral and returned to Colorado, he finalized the recording package and placed my belongings near the door. That was how I came home to Champagne divorce papers and his announcement that Juniper Crown was gone. After I told him he sold the wrong house, I did not explain the parcel number. I photographed the contract, the power of attorney, and every page in the recording packet. Grant told me I had spent too many years studying engineering drawings to understand real estate. I placed the brass compass beside the contract. You always preferred the cover page, I said. My grandmother taught me to read the map. Lorraine laughed and told me to leave before they called security. I picked up only my duty bag, Ruth's iron key, and the topographic map. The suitcases they packed remained beside the door. From my vehicle, I opened the county land records system. Juniper Crown still appeared inside Ruth's legacy trust. No valid deed had transferred it, and the title company had rejected the Aspen filing because no trustee had signed. Then I searched our Colorado Springs address. A deed had been recorded that morning. Grant had signed as my attorney, in fact, using the only parcel description his original authority covered. The ownership record no longer listed us. It listed the resort buyer. Grant had not sold my grandmother's Aspen estate. He had sold the house where he and Lorraine were still drinking champagne. I stared at the county record until the new owner's name stopped looking like a clerical error. Grant had signed away the home we bought after my second deployment. He was still inside that house drinking champagne beneath a roof that no longer belonged to him. I did not call to explain. I saved the recorded deed, the rejection notice tied to Juniper Crown and the original power of attorney. Then I drove to temporary officer lodging near the installation and contacted Ruth's trust attorney, Margaret Vale. Margaret answered before I finished the first sentence. The title company had already warned her about an attempted transfer. Juniper Crown could not be sold without the successor trustee's signature and independent approval. Grant had neither. The Aspen transaction never closed, she said. The county recorded something. Yes, the legal description in his deed belongs to your Colorado Springs residence. I placed Ruth's iron key beside her marked topographic map. Grant believed he had taken my inheritance, my home, and my marriage in one morning. In reality, the inheritance remained protected. The marriage had been broken long before the papers arrived, and he had transferred the only house his genuine authority covered. Margaret warned me not to celebrate. The resort buyer had paid a substantial deposit after receiving false representations. Grant had altered a legal instrument, spent part of the money, and created competing claims involving the buyer, the lender, his company, and our divorce. We separated the issues into 4 files. The first covered the legacy trust. The second covered the recorded deed. The third covered Grant's alteration of the power of attorney. The fourth covered the money he accepted and transferred. A colonel from my engineering unit brought soup and stayed while I reviewed the first documents. She had known Ruth and once spent a weekend at Juniper Crown after her husband died. She unfolded the map and touched the small cabin beside the northern trail. Your grandmother gave me the first quiet night I had slept in 9 months, she said. That memory steadied me more than the inheritance notice. Grant saw mountain acreage, resort revenue, and rescue money for his company. Ruth saw a place where exhausted people could breathe without explaining why they were tired. The original power of attorney was clear. It named our Colorado Springs address, the county parcel number, and the complete legal description. It allowed Grant to refinance, lease, or sell that property during a genuine emergency while I was deployed. A digital examiner compared it with the version Grant submitted. The first page had been replaced with a page naming Juniper Crown Estate. The font did not match the remaining document, and metadata showed the new page had been created on a computer in Grant's office. He had changed the attractive name at the front, but left the controlling description at the back. Lorraine's emails showed she knew he was rushing. 2 days before my return, she wrote, "Complete the transfer before Sloane speaks with the trust attorney." Another message said, "Once the Aspen money clears, serve her and keep the inheritance inside the marriage." Grant replied that I would be too shocked by the divorce to examine the filing. He also told Lorraine that military people follow documents without questioning the person who prepared them. I read that line twice. Grant had mistaken discipline for obedience to him. My career had taught me the opposite. A responsible officer checked the road authority, load, and destination before moving anything valuable. The financial review exposed why he took the risk. His company owed more than $2,600,000. A resort project near Telluride had stalled, contractors had filed claims, and the main lender planned to seize pledged equipment. The buyer sent Grant a deposit based on the promise that Juniper Crown would be delivered within 30 days. Grant immediately transferred money to overdue company accounts. He sent another portion to Lorraine, labeling it a family consulting payment. The divorce petition had been drafted 12 days before Ruth died. Grant requested part of the inheritance reimbursement for supporting my career and exclusive use of our marital residence. He signed that request after he had already transferred the residence to someone else. Margaret asked whether I wanted to notify him that the house had been sold. I said no. The county record was public, the deed was in his own file, and the legal description had been available on every page he signed. Explaining too early would allow Grant to stop communicating, return unused money, and claim a harmless administrative mistake. His confidence was still producing evidence. Through my divorce attorney, I sent a measured response. I would not claim ownership in Grant's development company. I would not oppose a prompt divorce. I would not demand continued possession of the Colorado Springs residence. Grant interpreted every sentence as defeat. He texted that cooperation was the first sensible decision I had made in years. Lorraine called my silence an admission that Grant had sacrificed more during the marriage. Relatives began repeating that I lost Aspen because I cared more about the Army than my husband. I saved each message without responding. The resort buyer demanded access to Juniper Crown for a site inspection. Margaret informed the company that no transfer had occurred and that Grant held no authority over the trust. The buyer's counsel then contacted Grant. He promised the delay was caused by probate formalities. He signed a second certification stating that I had approved the sale and that the trust would ratify his actions. I had approved nothing. Grant also pledged to repay the deposit from my inheritance if the title problem continued. That promise placed his scheme in writing. He was offering money he did not own to cover a sale he lacked authority to make. What happened next is why I did not correct him at the dining table. Silence can protect wrongdoing when it is born from fear, but disciplined silence can also give a dishonest person room to finish documenting his own choices. The buyer's title examiner discovered the recorded deed for Colorado Springs. She contacted our mortgage lender and asked whether the loan had been satisfied. It had not. Grant had conveyed the property without paying off the remaining mortgage. The buyer now faced a recorded ownership interest tied to a house Grant had never intended to deliver, and a lien he had not disclosed. The buyer froze all further funds and filed claims seeking repayment legal fees and damages. Grant blamed the title company. In an email, he insisted the first page controlled because it named Juniper Crown. The title examiner answered with one sentence: "Property is conveyed by legal description, not by promotional title." Grant forwarded the message to Lorraine and wrote that I must have changed the attachment after he signed. The document history disproved him. His own office had uploaded the complete packet and the county retained an unaltered digital copy. Lorraine began pressuring me directly. She said Grant had made a technical mistake while trying to save the family business. She asked me to sign a corrected Aspen deed and use part of Ruth's money to resolve the buyer's claim. I told her all communication had to pass through counsel. "You are letting him drown over one wrong number," she said. It was not one number. It was a property he never owned. She accused me of enjoying his fear. I ended the call because her accusation did not require an answer. Refusing to finance deception was not cruelty. My attorneys prepared a limited acknowledgement for the recorded deed. It stated that I would not oppose transfer of the property described in the filed legal description, subject to the rights of the lender and buyer. Grant saw the words "would not oppose transfer" and believed I had accepted the Aspen sale. He signed the acknowledgement without requesting a correction. Lorraine witnessed his signature. Their confidence converted a reckless mistake into a documented position. I placed the old Colorado Springs key inside a sealed envelope for court. The house had carried good memories once, but keeping its walls would not restore the trust Grant sold before he touched the deed. Juniper Crown remains secure. Ruth's attorney recorded my appointment as successor trustee, confirmed the $7 million as separate inherited property, and notified every financial institution that Grant held no authority. The trust records also showed Ruth had created the structure while fully competent 3 years before her death. Grant could not argue that I influenced a last-minute change from a distant assignment. By the time the hearing arrived, he believed he had only a temporary title problem. He expected the judge to confirm the Aspen transaction, award him part of the inheritance, and grant him control of the Colorado Springs house during the divorce. Grant entered the courtroom carrying a broker's confidence. Lorraine sat behind him wearing a white suit and the expression she had worn beside the champagne. The Resort Buyers Council occupied the opposite table with the title examiner. I arrived with Ruth's map, the brass compass, and the sealed envelope containing the house key. My attorney confirmed that I did not seek Grant's company and would not oppose transfer of the property legally described in the recorded deed. Grant leaned back as though the final resistance had disappeared. Judge Camille Foster opened the deed, studied the first page, then unfolded the attachment. She compared the Aspen name with the parcel number and turned toward Grant. "Mr. Harper," she said, "before we discuss any proceeds, would you please read the legal description of the property you sold?" Grant looked down at the final page. Behind him, Lorraine's smile disappeared. Grant read the first line silently, then stopped. Judge Foster waited while the courtroom clock marked several seconds above him. "Mr. Harper," she said, "please read the parcel number aloud." His attorney leaned closer, but the judge repeated the instruction. Grant finally read the number in a low voice. The title examiner entered it into the county system and turned her monitor toward the bench. The result displayed our Colorado Springs address. Judge Foster looked at Grant. "Is this Juniper Crown Estate?" "No, Your Honor." "Then, what property does this legal description identify?" Grant swallowed. "The marital residence." Behind him, Lorraine gripped the edge of the bench. The resort buyer's attorney opened another file while Grant began explaining that the Aspen name on the first page showed the intended property. Judge Foster held up the recorded deed. "Real property does not move according to intention written like an advertisement. It moves according to the legal description attached to the instrument." She reviewed the original power of attorney next. It named the Colorado Springs house the same parcel number and the same boundary description. It contained no reference to Juniper Crown inherited property or any trust. Grant said I had authorized him to manage family real estate during deployments. The judge asked, "Did Colonel Harper authorize you to act as trustee of her grandmother's irrevocable trust?" "No." "Did the trust sign the deed?" "No." "Did Colonel Harper sign it?" "No." "Then you did not sell Juniper Crown." The buyer's attorney stood and confirmed that the Aspen Title Company had rejected the attempted transfer. No valid deed had ever left the trust. The $7 million passed through accounts designated solely for me and never entered a marital account. Grant's request for half of the inheritance weakened before the judge even reached the financial evidence. My attorney presented Ruth's trust certificate account designations and independent estate records. Every document had been completed while Ruth was competent and years before her death. Judge Foster ruled that Grant's expectations did not convert inherited property into marital property. Then she returned to the deed he had actually recorded. The buyer had paid for an Aspen estate but received a recorded interest in the Colorado Springs house. The mortgage on that house had not been satisfied, and Grant had failed to disclose the lien. He had also spent much of the deposit before title could be delivered. The buyer's attorney asked the court to preserve claims for repayment damages and legal costs. Grant blamed the title company for accepting the filing. The title examiner responded that his office had supplied the complete recording packet. Metadata showed the altered cover page originated on Grant's computer. The remaining pages came from the genuine power of attorney. Lorraine's emails urged him to finish before I spoke to the trust attorney. Judge Foster asked Grant one final procedural question. As a licensed real estate broker, did you read the legal description before signing this deed? Grant looked toward his attorney. If he said no, he admitted signing a major transfer without reviewing the property. If he said yes, he admitted knowing the deed described the wrong house. I relied on my staff, he said. Judge Foster closed the deed. That was not my question. Grant offered no second answer. The court refused to validate any sale of Juniper Crown. It confirmed the estate remained inside Ruth's legacy trust and that Grant held no authority over it. The $7 million remained my separate inheritance. The recorded transfer of the Colorado Springs property required a separate title resolution, but Grant could not simply pretend it had never happened. The buyer had relied on his representations, and the county record carried his signature under the power of attorney. The judge preserved the buyer's claims and referred the altered document for further review. She also ordered the remaining deposit funds frozen. Grant's company records came next. More than $2,600,000 in debt sat behind the image he had maintained. He used the deposit to pay contractors, delay foreclosure, and transfer money to Lorraine. The divorce petition showed he planned to serve me before Ruth died. His claim that grief caused a sudden marital collapse disappeared under dates, invoices, and emails. Lorraine's message appeared on the courtroom screen. Once the Aspen money clears, serve her and keep the inheritance inside the marriage. She looked down when Judge Foster read it aloud. The court denied Grant any claim to Juniper Crown or Ruth's accounts. It also rejected his request for exclusive possession of the Colorado Springs home because he had already signed a deed transferring it. I opened the sealed envelope and placed the old house key on the table. Grant stared at it. For one moment, I remembered the day he gave me that key after my second deployment. We had stood in an empty kitchen eating sandwiches from a paper bag, believing the house would hold everything we built together. I did not feel joy watching that memory end. "You can give that to the buyer's counsel," I said. The buyer demanded repayment. Grant's company entered insolvency proceedings within months. The state licensing board suspended his brokerage license while reviewing the altered power of attorney and false certifications. The money sent to Lorraine was frozen, then ordered returned as part of the buyer's claim. Grant's lenders seized business assets. Several investors filed their own actions after discovering he had used the Aspen story to reassure them. I did not ask the court to ruin him. His scheme collapsed because every promise depended on property he never owned and a document he never finished reading. Lorraine came to Juniper Crown 4 months later. She stood outside the iron gate and said, "I had allowed Grant to destroy himself." "I did not make him sell that house," I told her. "I refused to sign away the one he never owned." She asked me to use Ruth's money to save his company and settle the buyer's claims. She said 16 years of marriage should mean something. "It does," I answered. "It means I know exactly how many chances he had to tell the truth." I told Lorraine she had to return every dollar she received from the deposit. She could not enter Juniper Crown without invitation, contact trust staff, or describe herself as having a family claim to the property. All further communication during the divorce would pass through attorneys. She asked whether I would ever forgive Grant. "Forgiveness may remove anger," I said. "It does not transfer debt, restore authority, or rewrite a deed." 18 months later, the divorce was complete. I retired from the Army with 25 years of service and moved into a modest house on the lower edge of the Juniper Crown property. The main estate became Ruth's Ridge Retreat. Military widows came for quiet weeks beneath the aspens. Caregivers rested between hospital appointments. Women leaving active service attended workshops about rebuilding civilian careers and protecting their financial independence. I used part of the inheritance to maintain the land and fund scholarships. The rest remained invested under the trust rules Ruth had written. Her topographic map hung in my office. My grandfather's brass compass rested beside the iron key. The white mug that read, "Build What Lasts," remained on the desk, chipped now along one side. During the first snowfall of the season, a military family arrived with 2 tired children and a mother who had not taken a full night for herself in years. I watched them enter the lodge while snow settled across the roof. Grant believed the largest house was the greatest prize. Ruth understood that value came from the lives a place could shelter. He thought a cover page could replace ownership. The truth waited in the legal description. Greed reads the price first and the conditions last. I did not save my inheritance by speaking louder. I saved it by knowing what belonged to me and refusing to sign it away. A home is not always lost when someone sells its walls. Sometimes it is lost earlier, when trust becomes another asset to manipulate. Have you ever seen someone ignore the final page because they were too excited by the promise on the first, "Share the lesson that experience taught you"? I would be honored if you pass this story to a woman who needs to remember that confidence does not create authority, and join me again for another story of courage, justice, and healing.